Now let's talk about sample data. If sample data are not collected in an appropriate way, the data may be so completely useless that no amount of statistical torturing can salvage them. The method used to collect sample data influences the quality of the statistical analysis. In other words, to have good statistical analysis, you have to use good sampling techniques. Random sampling is the process of using chance to select individuals from a population to be included in a sample. So to obtain a random sample, members from the population are selected in such a way that each individual member in the population has an equal chance of being selected. Here's some different sampling methods: systematic sampling, stratified sampling, cluster sampling, simple random sampling, and convenience sampling. Note that convenience sampling is not an appropriate method for statistical studies. First, let's look at systematic sampling. In this, you select some starting point and then select every kth element in the population. So in this picture, they started with man number 3, and then it looks like they were selecting every third member of the population after that. Here's an example. If we wanted to get a systematic sample of students at an elementary school, we could go through an alphabetical list of all the students. We could randomly select a starting point between 1 and 9, and then select every 10th name after that. The next type is stratified sampling. For this method, we subdivide the population into at least 2 different subgroups that share the same characteristics. Then we draw a sample from each subgroup. So in this picture, the population is divided into women and men, 2 different groups, and then individuals are randomly selected from each group. If we went back to the elementary school example, to get a stratified sample, we could divide the students into groups by class. So first grade, second grade, etc. Then we could randomly select 5 students from each class. The next type is cluster sampling. And this one is a little hard to tell the difference from the stratified sample, because in this one we also divide the population into sections or groups. But in this case, we randomly select some of those groups, and then we choose all the members from those groups. So here's an example in the picture. We have an area that's divided up into precincts. If we wanted to cluster sample, we could randomly select some of the precincts, and then we'd interview all the voters in those selected precincts. For our elementary school example, to get a cluster sample, we could divide the elementary students into groups by class. Then we could randomly select 2 classes, and then we'd choose all of the students from those 2 classes to be in our sample. Another sampling method is called simple random sampling. A simple random sample of n subjects is one selected in such a way that every possible sample of the same size n has the same chance of being chosen. In other words, if we wanted a simple random sample of 10 subjects, we'd have to do this in such a way that every possible sample of size 10 would have the same chance of being chosen. One of the easiest ways to think about this is that to get a simple random sample, there can't be any organized method of selection. It has to be completely random. So none of the other methods that we've talked about will give you a simple random sample. For our elementary school example, if we wanted a simple random sample of 30 students, we could either use a random number generators to select 30 names from the list of all the students at the school, or we could take all of the students' names, write each one on a slip of paper, put all those into a box, and then draw out 30 of them. And there's no organization. We're not dividing anything up into groups or classes or anything like that. Now the last one we'll talk about is convenience sampling, and this is where we just use results that are easy to get. For example, in the picture, this person is just stopping someone on the street who's walking by to ask them a question. An example from our elementary school is if we wanted a convenience sample of 25 students, you could select the first 25 students that walk through the front door tomorrow morning. That would be very easy to do, much easier than any of the other sampling methods. But the problem with this is that it's not an appropriate method for statistical studies. And that's because the resulting sample is almost certain to be biased. For example, with the elementary school, If we pick the first 25 students that walk through the door, they're likely to have something in common. They're likely to be the ones that always get there the earliest. They may be a different type of students than the ones who walk in late. In some way, that sample is going to be biased. Here's a summary of our sampling methods. One more hint for telling if something is a simple random sample. If the sampling method creates a random sample, but it can't be identified as systematic, stratified, or cluster sampling, then it's probably simple random sampling.